G'day guys, Hotfix 1.1.1 just came out and there's a ton of balance changes for invasion dungeons and inversion reinforcement that I kind of wanted to just go through because there are a lot of them and I think some of them need a little bit of explaining because maybe you got used to the old mechanics like I did and then these new ones are going to come out and they're just going to shake everything up for like a day. The Arcade Pillars in the Order of Truth dungeons are one of the more annoying features of invasion dungeons earlier and so now there's been some changes made to these ones. So instead of having 6 in the arena in each zone, there's going to be 4 and each one will have a symbol on it. And so they're getting rid of the blank ones that you spend a few seconds clearing and then you gain nothing from it. But they've also changed the symbols they're using in invasion dungeons across the whole. So they've gone from the, I don't know what the community called them all, but the biohazard symbol and all the other ones to these 4 now. So now we've got cross, triangle, circle, and square, and the same for that. It's the same on the pads that you have to stand on in the other variant of dungeons. Instead of being color coded, they're now just the same symbols. And so they are a universal mechanic now, I guess you could say. But they've also, on the pillars, they've reduced the number of hits required to destroy the tumors that are on them from 5 to 3, which is great. We're seeing a lot of reductions and changes across the whole, going from 5 to 3 and, just reduction in actual time that you have to spend doing mechanics. And so what they're doing is they're simplifying the mechanics, but then they're also making them easier to perform. And so we can see that in just here where it says adjusted the movement path of the ancestor drone and reduced the movement speed of the ancestor drone. Now, I have been running these every day. My main complaint with this invasion dungeon type has been that the drone will move in some weird way and get caught or clip behind stairs or an object or anything. And so when I'm going around and clearing the pillars and trying to grab my 2 symbols, I will never end up going back to the right ones and they move and I can never find them. And so hopefully that'll be fixed now. They've said they've made the changes for it, and so we'll get in there and get testing with it. They've also made the symbols on the drones easy to read. Instead of being horizontal, they're now vertically displayed, which makes them in line with how they appear on the pillars. So instead of having to, count them out and check the dots and all that, they're now it's vertical. And probably the biggest one for this dungeon type is they've reduced the number of hits to destroy the tumor blocking the door from 3 to 2. So instead of having to take 9 shots, it only takes 6 now. So you can clear it with 1 of the gun drops from the drones, which, clear speeds are just going to go through the roof now. It's going to be so much easier to get golds or silvers if you were getting bronze. I think across the board, this dungeon has been made super simple, super easy. I think the only change they made to make it a little bit harder was they increased the melee monster spawn rate, which I think is, that's fine, right? If you're playing Bunny, you're playing anyone with good AoE, it really doesn't matter that much. Probably the main pressure points in those missions are when you're waiting for the drone to explode and you can't move around too much if you're playing Bunny. But yeah, more melee monsters, it kind of makes sense, right? The mechanic just became so much easier. They've also made the inversion energy emitter, which is the gun that you get from the drone. They've increased the range on that and the fire rate. That was a bit of an issue where you were standing like 15, 20 meters away. You had a clear shot on one of the tumors and you'd shoot and it just wouldn't go off. So yeah, that's pretty good. I'm super happy about that. So yeah, Order of Truth dungeons, super easy now. 4 symbols. There are only 4 pillars, so you'll always find the symbols that you need. The drones are easy to read. Perfect. The artificial brains for the Legion of Immortality dungeons, this has been, this was already probably the easiest mechanic for most people, but they've made this even easier now, where they've removed the time limit for inputting, so you don't have a minute to get, I think it's all 45 of them or whatever you had to get, but now that's only 20, and you can only hold 10 now instead of 15, so instead of having to get 3 full inventories worth, you only need to get 2 now. And the total is less. So, that's great. And you don't need to do it in under a minute anymore. They won't delete your brains and they won't get rid of them. You won't have to get 3 full inventories. All right, next up, Legion of Darkness. So these are the tiles. You stand on the tiles, you read the door. So they've adjusted the positions to make it easier to identify them. I don't know what this means. I don't know if this means the initial tile that you use to start each encounter, or if they've actually changed where you have to stand. Because I feel like for some people like myself, you kind of already know most of the plate locations where you need to stand. There might be one up on top of a box or a ridge or something, but if they're changing it, I mean, I assume it'll just be easier across the board to see them. But if you already know the spawns, then, I mean, this is a little bit annoying, but who really cares? They've reduced the tile occupation time to 3 seconds. That is down from 5 seconds, which pretty much trivializes these. But they've also removed, or they say simplified, the colors, and now they've added symbols on the tiles. And so they've reduced the count from 6 to 4. So they've gotten rid of red and green, I think. And so now we have the cross, triangle, circle, square that we see in the pillars encounter, and now they're color coded as well, so you can easily look at them from a distance, even if you're playing on a 44-inch TV, right? All right, they've removed the bomber enemy that will destroy the tiles. So I mean, you don't need to do it super quickly now, because I think that's probably what most people were doing instead of actually like dealing with these guys as they spawn in. They were just trying to grab all 3 plates you need super quickly. Don't need to worry about them anymore. They've reduced the spawn rate of the raiders, who are the other guys that'll go stand on them and destroy them. Yeah, here we go, the central control unit. So that's the thing that you have to go stand on, and it'll tell you where everything is. So they will stay on longer after you step off, which, I mean, that's cool, right? Can't complain about that. Means that you don't need to sit up there and get shot at, right? And they've also added more of these central control units, so I assume there'll be probably 2 or 3 in each room. So, if you fail at one time or whatever, or if something destroys it and you have to reset, there are multiple different platforms that you can jump up to read these now, which is great. We're going to go through and look at all these, and if there's anything major that needs to be identified for the community, we'll have a video out on it. If anything is super big, or are there any large scale mechanical changes maybe that aren't listed, or if it's listed it's understated or anything like that, right? We'll do a full video on that, breaking it down if need be. Also, they've reduced the bosses and the boss patterns in all of the invasion dungeons. Every single boss has been nerfed. I've gone through all of these. The big ones are Tistran, who I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, he's the guy, and he sticks his hand out and the red and black things come after you and they attack you. He doesn't have that anymore. Maybe that's Tistran, I'm not too sure. But they've removed the beam attack from most of these bosses, which is, I mean, that's the main thing for everyone, right? The beam attacks, Farseers, Farcasters, I can't remember what the Farseers, I'm pretty sure, have them. Nobody likes them. They lock on, track on, movement speed buffs don't matter. You do just need to break line of sight, but that's been removed from most of these guys. Some of the other big ones, Agonia reduced the ice prison skill use frequency. That one's annoying for people if you have to stand still for a mechanic in a boss fight, right? And then just getting thrown in the ice prison, and then she drops the spears on you, right? That's been changed. Across the board, they will be using less skills while they're immune, while you're actually doing mechanics, which, that's great. Can't complain about that at all. But yeah, a lot of the grenades and beams, Charon got his shields removed. That's unfortunate. But yeah, the boss has been made easier, as opposed to making them less tanky, as opposed to reducing the number of boss phases that you actually need to go through. They've just made them easier to survive in, which I think, I mean, that'll help most people out, because the main issue that I've seen in Invasion Dungeons is survivability. It's not actually keeping up with the time limit. It's about just sort of getting everything in one shot, making it easier to survive, making it easier to do mechanics, and I think that'll help the clear rate of these a ton. So they've also, big one is Hailey's reward parts. These have been upped from 3 at gold, 2 at silver, and 1 at bronze, to 5 at gold, 4 at silver, and 3 at bronze. So guaranteed basically 12 a day. I can't complain about that at all. That's a little bit under double the drop rates from Invasion Dungeons. That reduces the total overall minimum time from Invasion Dungeons alone, so without doing any of the other dungeons to farm the parts. I think that reduces the time from around 12 days to, I think, what would it be, 8 days, 7 days, something like that. It's been cut down pretty significantly, so that's really good to see, especially for people who are just doing all 4 of these a day and they can't be bothered to grind Hailey's parts in the normal dungeons. I mean, this cuts off multiple days from your grind. It's super good. Before we jump into the Inversion Reinforcement rework, because these aren't balance patches, this is a full-scale rework. These are incredible now. It's no longer about finding the 3 that debuff you the most. It's now actually basically all of these are really good and all have some sort of a use case, be that in Colossus fights, be that in invasion dungeons. But yeah, the Inversion Reinforcement rework is incredible. But before we get into that, a few more little balance patches, balance changes. Overwhelming Shield and Overwhelming HP have both been buffed. I don't know anybody who uses these. I think the only character who I could make a case for actually running one of these on is Kyle with Overwhelming Shield. And the buff for that, I mean, if you run either of these mods, that's great. Like, you know, power to you. But I don't think anything really will make these more viable at all. Maybe if you're trying to max survivability and you have external components that you can't change, you know, they have max shield on them, right? And you can't change that. Maybe if you have the extra mod slots, right? Like there might be a use case if we ever hit a point where we need to actually squeeze out every last bit of survivability. But for the moment, these aren't big changes. Pyromaniac got nerfed in both standard and hard, along with the hummingbirds that appear in Executioner and Pyromaniac. A few people will be happy with this. Pyromaniac is an incredibly fun boss. I don't really have anything else to say for that. The chains and all that, that's all good fun. Decreased defense. I didn't think this was a wall for many people. I thought the main walls were like Dead Bride in hard, Frostwalker, Molten Fortress, all in hard mode, right? I didn't think that Pyromaniac was a bit of a wall for people, even in standard. Like he got nerfed in standard. Maybe there are a few of you out there who are incredibly excited by this change. Maybe now you can progress through Colossi a little bit. The kill score for defeating monsters in hard infiltration operations. So this is about hitting those score thresholds to get the extra amorphous material or to get the shape stabilizer. The points from defeating monsters has been increased in Magister Lab, Unknown Laboratory, and Quarantine Zone. Magister Lab makes sense, a very short dungeon, right? It's always been a little bit hard to hit that 50% or 100% score thresholds, right? So now this has just been cleaned up a little bit, and we had the score changes when Season 1 came out that cleaned that up a little bit. So it is much easier now to hit those score thresholds on those infiltration operations. They've also, this is a broad, I assume a broad change, shortened the time required to interact with objects. This could be everything, right? This could be interacting with the mailbox in Albion, or it could be picking up the supply token things in the supply missions. But I think, right, changing interaction times, shortening them can never go wrong. One of the issues actually that I heard come up a lot in the beta and even in the full release of the game was that people were being taken out of combat, and there were a lot of objectives where, you know, you had to do something and then pick up a bomb from an enemy or pick up anything like that, right? And it would just drag people out of combat. And this doesn't necessarily address that. I think we should still be able to shoot while holding something without dropping it, or at least something in place to let us know better that we've dropped it or anything like that. But there was an issue sort of with the flow of combat where people I know were complaining or having issues with having to complete objectives and interact with things in the middle of combat. So that's really good. Let's jump into the Inversion Reinforcement now. There's a ton of changes, and these are all really, really good. I am going to go through most of them individually. There are a few that I'm going to sort of skim over a little bit, like the particle membrane ones, which are the elemental resistance ones. They were all buffed. All their numbers were upped. All their debuffs were removed, and they stack less now. So I think it's still a net positive for actual resistance. I still think that, I'm just trying to do it in my head now. So they're easier to stack and they don't have downsides anymore, which is perfect, right? So the particle membrane ones are actually not bad at all now. Probably, I don't know, one of the big ones would be the chill resistance one. On hitting an enemy with a firearm, you get 9.8% chill resistance boost. I know a lot of people run frostbite immunity for Gluttony to just get rid of being frozen and being slowed like that. But if you're already stacking chill resist, this actually might not be a bad option for Gluttony. Getting an extra 20% chill resist just by hitting an enemy is really nice. That might help bump up some of the survivability and solve some of those issues in Gluttony, but that will need to be tested a little bit. Some of the big ones are the augmentations. So this is the top row, the hunt row. These had downsides that kind of made them, I'm not going to take extra max shield, right, in exchange for defense. But now downsides have been removed, positives have been majorly buffed. The biodensity augmentation, which is the health one, has been about doubled the bonus. So instead of having around 23 to 25% extra health for 30 seconds, by the way, with no cooldown, this just stacks. You can maintain stacks. It's really good. Instead of having around 20 sort of health, it's gone up to 45%. Well, sorry, 47.5%, which is crazy. If you can keep this rolling, if you're mobbing, running dungeons, anything like that, I mean, this works great, right? An extra 40% health for free is super nice. But if you're running something like Colossi, these ones are a little bit rough to take because, I mean, the ads are pretty scarce in those ones. But they are still nice bonuses. Like, I'm not going to complain. The defense one more than doubled, lost the max health reduction. And this is the one that I was using before the update. I'll probably still use this. It's almost as good as having the defense, I think it's called Defense Master special mod on your weapon, which gives you 122% bonus defense for 10 seconds every 15 seconds, right? So there's a 5-second downtime on that one. This is 35% bonus defense with no cooldown, stays at 5 stacks for 30 seconds. Like, you have 30 seconds to refresh a stack. That's really nice. This is probably the one that I will run. Maybe on some characters, I'll run the max MP one, because that didn't really get changed very much. It still reduces your skill effect range by up to 5%, but now it gives an extra 20% MP instead of an extra 15. Luna will enjoy this. I think Luna's probably the big one. Characters with range to spare. Most bunnies probably don't mind a 5% range cut in order for them to use speed of light for longer. So that's really nice. Max shield bump, Kyle, Ajax, Enzo. I mean, this is a great choice. The defense one is arguably just better for a lot of those characters, but like Kyle, Enzo, Ajax, I mean, mess around with this. It goes up to, what's that, an extra 33%? Yeah, that's not bad at all. If you have high enough shield regen from external components, this works really well. We already covered the particle membranes. These are all great bonuses. I think the big one that I forgot to mention was the toxic resistance. While aiming, you get toxin resistance, but you actually lose firearm attack and explosive attack. That's just weird, right? Like, that's just a downside for the sake of having a downside. So now that one's fixed up. It's the same as all the other ones. Just while aiming down sights, you get an extra 13% toxin resist is super nice. But these ones are a little bit more interesting. I can't remember, I think they're called survivability. I think it's the third row. It's the ones that give you HP, MP, the grappling hook one. These were buffed pretty nicely. So the inverted defibrillation, which is the first one in that row, which consumes all MP to not die when you're below 10% health or less. That was a little bit weird. That had a cooldown of 25 seconds. So it would get you out of danger, and then it would be useless for 25 seconds. And then, you could regen like 20% of your health and then immediately get dropped back down. This already wasn't very good to begin with. Having a safety net, it's nothing like Lepic's passive or anything like that. And if you're getting to the point where you're below 10% health or less, and you're not, like, if you're not on a character like Gley, right? If you're getting to that point, then there's probably a bigger issue with your survivability than needing to have a worse version of Lepic's passive, right? But this did get buffed. Cooldown was reduced from 25 to 15 seconds. I mean, if you're dying a lot and you struggle with survivability, probably just look at your build and external components and stuff instead of taking this one. It's nice, but it's nothing special. Next up, selective neurostimulation, which is every 60 seconds something will happen, but what it actually is up to chance. That is staying the same. The numbers are just getting raised massively. I use this one. I'm probably going to keep using it, especially now that it's been buffed a little bit. 60% chance every 60 seconds to give you back 13% of max MP, which is good. That's up from 9%. A 30% chance to restore 23.5% of max MP, which is up from 15.6. Again, huge. Like, a free quarter of my MP bar back every 60 seconds for doing literally nothing is pretty good. I probably have still a little bit of bias from remembering and learning the old ones before the patch and thinking that this was like one of the best of the worst, and sort of using it because I didn't have any other option. But I do feel like selective neurostimulation is really good still for all activities, right? Bossing, mobbing, dungeons, all of it, right? It also has a 10% chance to give you back 30% MP and 8% max health, which is nice. That's upped a little bit. It used to be 20% and 5% of health. This one doesn't, like, on average, this procs every 10 minutes. but it's still nice. Like longer farms, anything like that, where you're using a lot of abilities. You're playing someone like Bunny or Lepic or anything like that. This is a nice one to have for sure. Recovery maneuver, which is, it used to be grappling would give you back 25% of your max shield if you grappled for a second. If you stayed hooked for a second, you'd get a quarter of your max shield back. However, while you were grappling, you'd take 13% more damage, which was just a huge downside, a huge turnoff. But now the negative penalty, the incoming damage modifier, was removed. Look, this is not great for survivability. It's cool. Kyle might find some use out of this, getting his max shield back. Enzo might. We don't have shield gating, right? That's the issue. If we had something like shield gating in Warframe, where being able to quickly get a burst of shield could keep you alive for a ton of extra time, that would be great. But because it's not, we don't have shield gating. Most characters' shields are super low. It's just going to get stripped through really, really quickly, and then for 20 seconds you have a dead inversion reinforcement skill, right? Next up, Arcade Assimilation. Standing near allies will build stacks. When the stacks hit max, you heal 10% of your max health. This was already pretty good. If you're playing multiplayer, you're doing farms where you're super close to maybe like another Bunny, or you're playing Colossus fights and you're playing someone like Enzo or Eugene. Standing next to other people getting health back is nice. This got a slight buff. I think it probably only needed a slight buff. It's now 14% at max stacks rather than 10. Every 5 seconds with a 10-second downtime, you get 14% of your max health back. That's nice. Super good. All right, and Hyperdimensional Vision, which is the capstone for the survivability tree. This one got a nice change. It was already it was useless. And now it's actually pretty good, because we are going to get all the capstones by the end of the season. If you max out your inversion reinforcement device, you are going to get all the capstones, be able to use them whenever. They are passive bonuses, but it used to be landing a firearm crit gave you a 20% chance to full cleanse yourself for 3 seconds, and yeah, you get debuff immunity, so it's a full cleanse for 3 seconds. But that was on a 5-second cooldown, and so having a cleanse on a cooldown like that sounds good. Like games like Final Fantasy and all that have cleanses. Games have cleanses on demand, sort of like that, but this isn't on demand. If you were in no chance of danger and then your 5-minute timer went up and you landed a firearm crit, you're immune to debuffs for 3 seconds. The boss isn't shooting at you, or enemies aren't shooting at you, right? It's not on demand. It's every 5 minutes randomly when you hit a crit, right? Like that's not great for a passive, especially not for a capstone. That got a slight buff, reduced down to 1 minute cooldown, which is more reasonable. The chance to actually proc it when hitting a firearm crit is fine. Instead of hitting 5 crits, you now have to hit 4 to get it to proc. I mean, that change doesn't really matter, but the cooldown is a big one. Going from 5 minutes to 1 minute kind of makes it a little bit more on demand. Maybe you have a weapon that crits, maybe you have a weapon that doesn't crit. Being able to quickly swap to another weapon, grab that crit, get a cleanse, might save a few people, especially seeing as it is just a passive, it is a capstone. It is a nice bonus now, as opposed to literally being useless at 5 minutes. Void Adrenaline, which is the first skill in the fourth row. When HP is 20% or less during Void Intercept battles, you get Void Adrenaline. And that used to increase your movement speed, but cut your damage by 32% and your explosive damage by 32% for 3 seconds. Why? Right? Movement speed doesn't do much generally, because enemies and bosses have like hit scan attacks, they have lasers, they have stuff that you can't really dodge. A lot of bosses shoot a ball out that acts as a turret, right? Like movement speed doesn't really do much there. And then being forced to, if you get hit, right, and then Void Adrenaline procs, sure, you move faster, but then your damage gets absolutely cut. This was not good. Now it's a little bit better. I still think it's going to be tough to use. They removed the penalty, so you get 20% movement speed for 3 seconds on a 10-second cooldown while your health is below 20% or less during intercept battles. Now that, it's just, I don't think it's worth one of the 3 slots at all. I really don't think that this compares at all to 35% or whatever it was of defense, or a huge health bump or a huge shield bump or a huge MP bump. It's not equivalent, right? But it is definitely a super solid buff for this skill in particular. Next up, this is one of my favorite changes. All of the extra damage resist while fighting a certain faction, those mods got buffed pretty massively. I always run one of these. I always keep on the one that I'm currently fighting against. If I'm farming a certain mission, I'll have the correct faction on. It's kind of like Bane mods from Warframe, if you know what those are, extra damage to certain factions, but this is damage resist. You'd get 5 seconds of minus 15% damage taken, so 15% damage reduction. 5 seconds every 25 seconds, which is nice. Like that's a passive bonus, right? There's no activation condition. It's just up. Sometimes it saves you, sometimes it might not, right? But it's a nice bonus and it's faction specific. This got buffed down from 25 seconds to 15. This means that there is a much, much shorter downtime between procs of this. The overall damage reduction that this gives you, because of the downtime, the reduced downtime, you are now seeing this happen a lot more and you're actively benefiting from it. So it is a big bump to survivability as long as you match it with the correct faction, right? And the same goes for I believe, is this the capstone? The Void Defense Optimization? It might be. During Void Intercept battles, every 150 seconds, so 2.5 minutes, you would get a stacking damage reduction that would just sort of stay with you the entire time. That used to go up to 5.4% damage reduction at 7.5 minutes past, which is nice. If it's the capstone, if I'm remembering correctly, that's fine, right? Like it's a passive. But that did get buffed to 3 stacks of minus 2.7, which comes out to 8.1% total damage reduction at 7.5 minutes of a Void Intercept. I don't remember the last time I spent more than 7 minutes on a Void Intercept. Maybe one of my Gluttony runs early on where we didn't have great DPS might have gone that far. 7 minutes, maybe in the new one that comes out, Deathstalker. We might see some longer Void Intercepts coming back, but for the moment, this isn't a great capstone. Now, in the final row, we have the seasonal ones, and these are specifically to do with Excava or like the seasonal activities. These got some nice buffs in line with the changes made to inversion dungeons. Like the first one here, where stepping on an arcade tile would give you a stacking defense buff. Now it used to stack up to around 20% after 2.5 seconds of standing on a plate. You're going to be standing on a plate for 2.5 seconds now, and then you're going to be jumping off, right? So that did get changed. It now only takes 1.5 seconds to stack, which is half the total time. And that gives you, 35% around that defense bump, which is great. Super good if you're struggling with survivability in this. I can't even remember what enemies, like there's a new sniper enemy for the tiles that has one-shot me before. So maybe this extra defense is nice. I, again, don't run this, but it is a nice buff if you are someone who runs this. Excava, the Excava one, where having grenades at max stacks would give you a huge firearm attack bump, like a massive damage boost. It used to be 35% for 2 seconds, so it would give your grenades bonus damage, basically. I think that's pretty much what it's trying to come across as. But you could definitely get some extra shots out while that 2 seconds is active. That's been bumped from 35% to 51, that's a rifling reinforcement mod, right? Like that is a full extra mod worth of damage for the grenades, and then a few extra bullets if you have high enough fire rate. This is good. The cooldown is still a little bit annoying, and I think Excava needs some buffs. Its base stats aren't great. You kind of are just trying to focus for raw and elemental damage with Excava, as opposed to weak point and crit, which is the meta. But it's definitely fun to use. I 100% recommend trying it out if you haven't. Use it, mod it a little bit. We are going to have a full guide on Excava coming out when we hit level 100 in the past. But yeah, we've been working on modding it a little bit, theory crafting. The numbers are just a little bit weak, but the gun is definitely a lot of fun to use. It's very Quicksilver Storm, micro rockets from Destiny, that sort of thing. Anyway, Arcade Pacemaker. When movement speed is 300 or less, you get Arcade Pacemaker. It used to reduce your skill costs, but it would also cut your fire rate and your skill range, which is just weird. Like, I don't understand how moving slowly cuts your fire rate. I think this is mainly useful for Luna running Arcade Concretion, or people who run Arcade Concretion, because it does lower your movement speed, if I'm correct about that. Lowers your movement speed, and then skill cost matters on Luna, right? Like, maximizing your MP and MP recovery is good for Luna. But if you're playing someone or doing something where your movement speed is less than 300, you probably don't want to take a fire rate buff, a fire rate nerf, unless you are playing Luna. But it did get buffed to, the skill cost was upped from 20% to 25%. So That is a buff for Luna players if that's what you're running. I'm trying to think who else has low movement speed, maybe like Eugene, but I think he runs Passionate Sponsor. Yeah, the support characters run Passionate Sponsor to buff their own damage. I think the only person who uses Arcade Concretion is Luna. Luna players, rejoice. You got a 5% buff. And then finally, the capstone for the final row used to be actually useless. Like I could never see a use case for this ever, but now it's a little bit more useful. I still think on a lot of characters, this is actually completely redundant. Characters with toggles, so Bunny, Hailey, to an extent Gley, her abilities have cooldowns, but they're essentially toggles. When all skills are on cooldown, you get unconsciousness, which lowers the cooldown of your next skill used by 8%. That's like every 3.5 minutes as well. I can't see a use, right? Maybe if you time it well enough with like Lepic, you can get some extra cooldown off his ult, or you get extra cooldown off like Kyle's ult or someone like that. Someone with a big ability that has a long cooldown, but then all of their other abilities can also have long cooldowns, which is very, very few characters. I'm struggling to even think off the top of my head. Maybe like Enzo. Enzo might get some use from this, but the cooldown was removed, so it is now more feasible on characters like Enzo, Eugene, characters with ultimate weapons maybe, but I don't know how it works with toggles like on Hailey. I'm going to test this out a little bit. If it's broken and it works super well on a ton of characters, I mean, we'll make a video on it. Yeah, it's a weird change, and it's a weird thing across the board. It's a good change, it's a weird thing across the board as a capstone. But for the most part, I'm pretty sure that's all of the changes. Huge buffs, massive reworks to Inversion Reinforcement and the Invasion Dungeons. I mean, these things are like, this is a crazy good change. The Hailey rewards have been buffed. That's super good. The bosses were nerfed. There were some minor UI, UX bug fixes. I think Jaber got fixed finally. The turrets now actually have proper range. I still don't know. I don't think Jaber's good for anything at the moment. I'm gonna probably pick up Jaber. I'm playing a ton of SEMO. He is a lot of fun. He is not that good, but he is a lot of fun. And we're gonna have a build guide on SEMO for maximizing explosions, maximizing fun. Really, he is just a blast to play. There is no pun in that. Don't read into it too much. Anyway, super good patch overall. People were asking for this since they came out, since season 1 dropped. This just feels like more refined. This feels like a better version of the game mode that I'll actually look forward to playing more. But I think with the rewards being as stacked as they already were, like 5 million gold a day, right? I'll put myself through hell for that. Anyway, if you made it to the end of the video, thank you so much for watching. Let us know in the comments below your thoughts on the patch notes and also your thoughts on the video. This is sort of our first time going over patch notes like this, explaining everything. If you want to see more of it, the best way to let us know that is to like and subscribe, but also you just being here. Thank you. Leave a comment as well if any changes, anything like that, as well as overall thoughts. But thank you very much for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.